Welcome back to the GSMC Hockey Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. We're going to get right into our third segment of the night where we will be talking about the NHL and how they announce in their announcement of the Stanley Cup final schedule and what it really means going into the summer months of the hockey schedule. It is a very late Stanley Cup final. I saw on this day a few years ago. Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals was played yesterday in 2018. And we're still in Game 5 of the Western Conference Final right now. And that reminds me to take a look. It's still 3-0 for the Edmonton Oilers. But we are in Game 5 of the Western Conference Final right now. Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Final playing tomorrow. If the Western Conference Final goes the distance, as it very well can, then you will have the conference finals being played until, when would that be? January 4th would be, yes, June 4th would be the last game of the Western Conference Final. And then you have Saturday, June 8th is Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. So already a quick turnaround there, but it's also the last game of the conference final being played in June is kind of insane to me. As you know, I grew up mid-May is really when the conference finals were being played. And now it's May 31st, and we're not even close to we're a little bit close, but we're on the back half of the conference finals. Here's the problem: is you have Game 1 on June 8th, Game 2 on June 10th, Game 3 on June 13th, Game 4 June 15th, and then if necessary, 5th game is June 18th, 6th game June 21st. And 7th game, June 24th. You have a 2-day break in between 1 and 2, a 3-day break between 2 and 3, 2-day break between 3 and 4, and then, 1-day break between game 1 and 2, 2-day break between 2 and 3, 1-day break between 3 and 4, and then 2-day break going subsequently after that. Here's the problem, and here's the biggest issue, is the NHL entry draft is June 28th. Or is it? It's 3 days. Yeah, it's June 28th. 3 days after the end of the Stanley Cup Finals if it were to go to 7 games, which it definitely could. You're looking at these 4 teams. Can you tell me which is the best team out of these 4 teams? All 4 of these teams are so even, and we're seeing it in the conference final. And I definitely think we could see it in the Stanley Cup final going the distance and going to a Game 7 as well. So if it does go to a Game 7, you have that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in between. And then on that Friday is the NHL draft. And then you have the NHL draft for the next 3 days. And then you have the re-sign period. So you have the 20th, 29th, 30th of June are your draft days. And then on the 30th, and then July 1st is your re-sign period pretty much. Although, guys are in contacts to re-sign from now on, and then starting at 12 o'clock on June 1st is your free agency period. So there is no break for these GMs. You have 3 days between the Stanley Cup final and now. So, if you're a general manager of, let's say, the Florida Panthers, they were to win Game 6, they go on to the Stanley Cup final, you go to 7 games against, let's say, the Oilers, and you're now you have to quickly turn around from winning the Stanley Cup. First off, what day do you get your parade in there? You don't, I guess, is the answer. You can't celebrate because then you have the NHL draft, which is a huge moment for all of these franchises to go and turn their page, right? So you have the NHL draft, and then you have free agency 2 days after that. You're going one after another, and then the free agency period doesn't really end it doesn't end until really the 1st of, I would say the 1st of September is when you really don't see any more free agent names out there. All of them have pretty much found a home at that point. but mid-September is when the preseason starts. The way the NHL calendar used to be set up was by the first week of June, we're pretty much wrapped up with the Stanley Cup Finals. Then you have a 2-week break. Then there's the NHL draft pretty much early, like I think it's usually June 22nd or June 23rd, somewhere around that period. And then you have a week for resigning guys, and you kind of have that dedicated. And then you have the free agent period after that. And then mid-September rolls around and you're ready to go. These guys don't get a break, and it kind of sucks for these front offices, especially for front offices that are still like, these guys shouldn't be punished for being in the Stanley Cup final. Like, these guys shouldn't have to go through this just because they're playing well, right? They put together a winning squad, and this is their reward. I mean, it's a little bit of a deterrent, I guess. But, I mean, of course not. Of course, you're still in the sport to win the Stanley Cups, but it is. I mean, it sucks for these front offices having to, I mean, you're thinking of so many decisions on the fly constantly at this point. And before you were able to take 2 weeks after the playoffs to really sit down with everybody. First off, your general managers need to be talking to these scouts. And I'm pretty sure that the general managers for the Florida Panthers, Rangers, Oilers, and Stars, the last thing on their mind is drafting. Those guys are dialed into the playoffs, trying to figure out first off what pieces are working on their team right now, what pieces maybe are not. There's already talks about Capo Caco being traded in this offseason. I saw a report about that today. The Rangers are still in the playoffs. They're not even eliminated yet, and we're talking about a 4th overall pick from a couple years ago being traded out. I mean, this turnaround that we're having is insane, that we're talking about trades for these teams that are still in the playoffs. And, of course, for the teams that didn't make the playoffs, for your Devils, your whatnot, like all the teams that didn't make the playoffs, they've been able to sit around. And those are the guys that, of course, need to talk to their scouts more. But these general managers that are at the top are, you can remain at the top in the NHL because the talent pool is so dispersed in the NHL. You're talking about all these players. I mean, we're talking about all these players on the New York Rangers especially. Almost all of this New York Rangers team is late-round draft picks. Artemi Panarin was undrafted. Vincent Trocheck was a third-round pick. Mika Zibanejad was a late-round pick. Chris Kreider wasn't too early in the draft. Adam Fox was a first-rounder, but I'm pretty sure it was late in the first round. Igor Shesterkin was a later pick. I mean, we're talking about this team in the New York Rangers, how it's one of the greatest teams. None of these guys were really top-end talent, so no matter where you're picking in the NHL draft, you're able to get a player that can really help your franchise. So you're gonna want to be able to sit down with your scouts and really have long, drawn out conversations. Really, what do you see in this guy? Why is he good? What have we talked about with this guy? And you're gonna need to conduct interviews with all of these draft picks that you're gonna want to go after. Is 3 days enough to do that? I mean, could you imagine you're in the middle of a Stanley Cup final? Let's say it's June 22nd, and you're about to play in Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final. I mean, a franchise-altering moment, a franchise-altering game. And you're going to need to call up a potential draft pick and be like, hey, do you have time on the 25th so that I can sit down and talk to you and we can do a interview? No, I mean, you're focusing on the Game 7 that could potentially alter your franchise. And it's so unfortunate for these guys. I mean, these playoff games should end early June so that you have a 2-week period. And I'm not even saying for, these guys, I'm not calling for these guys to go to Cabo and go to vacation for these 2 weeks. I mean, they have work to do, of course. And, I mean, you're making it hard for them to do that work. That's why I'm saying, you need to do interviews with these guys. You need to talk to your scouts. You need to put a game plan. You need to put a free agency plan together. You're going to need to talk to your team, talk to who you can re-sign, figure out who you can trade, think about your cap space situation. And you're doing all of that while you're in a Stanley Cup final run. I mean, it's so difficult for these for the general managers and these presidents who are currently in the playoffs. not to mention the long wait that it's been for the teams that haven't been in the playoffs. We're talking about like a Columbus Blue Jackets team who hasn't played since mid-April, and now you're waiting 2 full months until you're getting action again. It's unfortunate. I mean, you're just kind of sitting around on your butt doing nothing, watching playoff games, I guess. I mean, Don Waddell has a lot to think about with that Blue Jackets organization, so I guess he likes the time that is being spent. But for other organizations, it's the calendar is kind of messed up, and it was at such a great spot, and then of course COVID happened, and then we had to push everything back, and we're just now getting to a point where we're kind of moving around to where it kind of fixes itself. But next year is Olympic year, so you'll have a 2-week gap in January, and then that'll push back the playoffs for that season, and it's gonna look unfortunate again. Especially, I'm excited for that. Of course, having NHL players back in the Olympics, that's of course going to be very fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, for these guys, it sucks for them. So we'll see how it plays out here. If it doesn't go to 7, then these guys get a week, right? Let's say the Stanley Cup Finals ends in 5 games, although I do not see that happening. I see it going further. If it ends in 5 games, it's done June 18th, and we're not even talking about it like it's a problem. So we'll see how it plays out. But right now, just looking at it, it looks pretty bleak for these organizations. So we're going to go into our third break, and when I come back, we'll be talking about the Calder Cup, the AHL championship that's going on right now simultaneously with the Stanley Cup Finals.